You're listening to the 14th Source for all geeky and nerdy news and discussion, which means that you're listening to a podcast.
For all intents and purposes.
I am Dee Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplin.
And we are your two overeducated, codependent nerd hosts, bringing you the things that we like to talk about, but filtered through inquisitive and critical lenses. In the episode for Friday, February 4th? That sound right? 2022.
Yes.
Welcome to February, the hardest month to say.
February.
I figure they created a month just to have a word to use during a sobriety check.
I doubt it.
Do you know what happened to me in February? I became a judicial rural juror. But actually, I want to start with a bit of news, if you don't mind. It's like it won't stop, Andrew. Another major video game acquisition by a large conglomerate company. I don't know if you heard about this.
Yeah, Activision bought Blizzard.
No.
Blizzard bought Microsoft bought Acta Blizzard.
No, that's not even what I'm talking about. That's old news.
Oh my gosh, you mean there's something else that happened?
Yeah. I mean,
what could it be?
I'm talking about New York Times buying Wordle.
Oh, don't get me started.
You know what? I'm not going to shame anybody for getting a paycheck for making a game that he made.
Good on the guy. I mean, don't get me wrong. Good on Mr. Wardle.
Yeah. If you don't know, Mr. Wardle made a game called Wordle. It's genius. Beautiful. It's art.
It's just more of that frustration of how long until that shit gets paywalled, or.
That's okay. I mean, every flash in the pan game, and that's honestly what it is. Like, it has a decline. By the time New York Times starts putting money walls on it, like, no one's going to care anyway.
Oh, sure. We'll find something new to do.
I guess there was also the news of Sony buying Microsoft's Bungie.
Buying Bungie, previously owned by Microsoft.
It's amazing. This industry is stupid.
And I'm waiting for Nintendo to announce that they're buying like a glue factory.
Well, right.
Because it's not going to be, Nintendo's not going to buy something that makes sense. It's like, oh, they bought a glow stick company.
But the thing is, like, Sony also in their announcement made it clear that, like, they're not done with announcements yet. So who knows who else is up on the chopping block? Not on the chopping block, on the acquisition block, I guess. Lots of names have been tossed about. I think it would be interesting if Sony, because they already have a really tight relationship with this company, picking up Capcom. Though I don't know if Capcom's ready to sell yet. They were really close to that, but then they did Monster Hunter World, which apparently did gangbusters and saved the company.
There's a lot of I don't like the consolidation of all companies, right?
But, let's make that clear. This is dumb.
What I love about this is when this discussion happens, people are like, all right, Capcom and Konami, here's your chance.
Right. That's the joke I was going to make. I'm like, but you know who needs to sell?
Yeah, like both Capcom and Konami, like those two, they're waiting like, all right, who's going to come first? Right. And Microsoft and Sony are like, actually, we don't want to buy you. So
it's dumb. The one interesting thing about the Sony Bungie purchase is that they're really making it clear, at least at the outset, that actually they're not absorbing Bungie into like the Sony studio system like they've done with Naughty Dog, Insomniac, that kind of stuff. It's like it's still going to operate independently, I'm guessing, and they're still going to release multi-platform kind of stuff, and Sony seems to be fine with that. Who knows what that means in 10 years when maybe Bungie has one bad game or something.
It's funny because I was thinking about this. I had this memory of the BattleNet having some connection with Destiny.
The game Destiny, not like a connection with Destiny.
No, that like when I logged into BattleNet, it was like, oh, you can play Destiny through here, and it's funny because that's now a Microsoft and Sony, right?
right.
Through subsidiaries.
We could talk about the news and stuff, but I think just the lifespan of Bungie in itself is just bizarre and hilarious. It was a Mac game maker. Like, they made games for Macs.
They made Marathon, which was a first-person shooter that, both of the friends I had who had Macs thought it was the best.
I thought you said you just only had two friends, but yeah.
No. Well, actually, I mean, I even know one of my friends would always go on about like, yeah, this game's the fucking best. It's like, okay, but you're the only one with a Mac that can play it.
With your one-button mouse.
And then they did Myth, which was like a war game type thing. Like a strategic kind of war game, which that actually was released on PC. And I actually remember my brother played that one a lot. And then eventually they did Halo.
After getting purchased by Microsoft. Then Microsoft let them go because they were putting together 343 Studios to continue Halo. And then they did their own thing. And now, owned by Sony. Sure. You know what? 20 years, Nintendo is going to own Bungie in some shape or form. They're just kind of hopping around. Why not?
It is, yeah. It's weird,
right? It's like this weird. What do they call it? The when you get all the awards, like the Emmy, the Grammy, the Oscar,
EGOT,
the EGOTs. Yeah, like they're doing that, but just in terms of in terms of ownership. We've been owned by all the major corporations, video game corporations. They're almost there, so good for them. But we're not here to talk about news. We did that last week. We've done that many weeks recently. Instead, what we are going to do is going back to the source, going back to our roots, Andrew. That's what people have been clamoring for. If you read the subreddits on about our podcast, I was like, why can't they get back to their roots? Yeah, it's true. What we're going to do this week is discuss our respective weeks in geek. Andrew, if you don't mind starting, what was your week in geek like this week?
So this is not like a super intense week in geek, but it's often that I talk about, I play a lot and read a lot about tabletop role-playing games.
I've noticed that, like, you've been really active in that arena. Like, you're really just, especially on Twitter. If you don't follow Andrew on Twitter, he actually talks on Twitter, unlike myself.
Yeah, but all I talk about is mostly role-playing game shit.
And tabletop stuff, and specifically, but you're asking questions and and you're talking about stuff you're figuring out, which is really interesting, even as a person that doesn't really play tabletop role-playing games. Recently,
there was a new game came out, a new tabletop role-playing game published by a company called Renegade Game Studios, it's a tabletop company. I actually don't know what they got started with, but I know one of their kind of popular games for a while was a board game called Clank, which that's what a lot of people, so they did a lot of tabletop board games.
Okay. Board games,
yeah.
Okay.
And then later they started doing role-playing game stuff. And quite frankly, I may have this order all wrong. I just know, how I experienced them, right? At one point, they got contracted by they do contract work, it seems, development work for other companies, they produce games for other companies under license. So they actually have some stuff for Vampire the Masquerade.
Okay.
And I'm not sure why they have it. I'm not sure if it's they develop it for whatever the hell the company's called now. It used to be White Wolf, now I think it's Onyx Path or some shit. Okay. But anyway, they also, a year or two ago, had announced that they were developing a series of role-playing games for Hasbro.
You have my attention.
So they had a few of them, and which is weird, right? Because that Hasbro would contract with a company to make a role-playing game because Hasbro owns a company that makes the most popular role-playing game in the world, right. Dungeons and Dragons. But
right, Hasbro owns Wizards of the Coast.
Right, but they did. So they're like, Renegade Game Studios is going to develop the role-playing game, and when they first announced this, they said it was going to be using a version of the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons.
Okay.
Although eventually later they changed that. And the 3 games that I'd seen, I think they were announced at the same time. And I'm going to say these, and you're going to be like, I would not have guessed those games need role-playing games. G.I. Joe.
Okay. I'm getting really excited.
Mighty Morphin Power Rangers.
Okay.
And some property known as Transformers.
Shut the front door.
Yeah, so those are the 3 that they basically they're all, as I understand, going to use now. It was originally 5th edition D&D. Now it's going to be this new system they call the Essence system or some shit like that.
Yeah,
right.
Is it also a scent they're selling?
So they announced that, and
what's a Transformers scent? What's a GI? Smell the Duke.
The Duke. That doesn't sound like a scent I want to smell. So the games. So of the 3 games, one of them has finally been made available. It's shipping out, and the PDFs are available. And that's the Power Rangers role playing game,
of course.
Which for me, as someone who watches a lot of Sentai shows, I've watched Power Rangers shows. I was like, you know what? And I've actually talked about on Twitter about how Power Rangers could be a really interesting collaborative, casual role playing game, right? Because it's not like there's not a lot of elaborate plots. You really can make up every session as you go, but there's, you
can reuse previously existing modules and campaigns and just change the dialogue and story to fit your needs.
Yeah.
Recast one of the characters, change their gender if you want.
Yeah, just do whatever you want.
Yeah.
But I was interested because to me it seems like it could be a fun thing to do, because there are some tropes of that genre that are fun.
Yeah.
And so I ordered it, which I haven't gotten the physical book yet, but I have the PDF of the rules.
So before we go in, let's go back to, if you can remember your Twitter thread about this. What did you want? What did you get?
So when I started watching, so actually back when, like a year ago, I started watching Power Rangers Ninja Steel, which is like the 2015 Power Ranger show, maybe 2016. And I watched that, and as I was watching it, I kind of had this idea of like, wow, there's some tropes here, some basic kind of things that they do all the time that really could feel like this could just be like a fun role-playing game. And it reminded me in a lot of ways, I was thinking of Spectaculars, the superhero role-playing game I talked about a few years ago,
right?
Where like you could really just like have this almost like, we don't need to plan anything. We pull the box off the shelf and using some cards and some other mechanics, like conceive of what the session is, right? Here's a monster. Here's how, here's a little quick story about how, it's hurting people or something,
Right.
And some of the things I thought of is like, I kept thinking of things that would be very applicable. Like the idea that like, look, this is a game where there would be no battle map, but you could imagine if there would only be 3. Right, there'd be a quarry, there'd be a park, and there'd be the joke is that no matter where you say you're going,
Power Rangers or is this Doctor Who?
Right, it's Power Rangers. It's like the idea that no matter where you say you're going, it's always the same map of the quarry. You just move props around, and this the notion of like how. Like, oh, you can just change scenes just like that. Like, oh, the monster blasted us really hard, and now we're in the quarry, even though we were just in the park. Or, characters just show up. Like, oh, look, suddenly Bobby the Blue Ranger is in the scene, even though he wasn't a few minutes ago. I was just making up my own Power Ranger.
Let's respect the canon.
Except I would have said Coda the Blue Ranger, thank you.
Coda, we're not near the end.
But anyway, so that was the idea I had, and then I'd seen the announcement a year or so ago that they were using 5th edition. I'm like, well, okay, that's maybe not what I would have done. And then they announced they're doing their own system, and they actually they contracted with a lot of kind of people that I see in the field, like people that that do TTRPG play and design, and they have their own system that. Which so this is the first time this system has come out, right? So this is the first game to use it.
The Essence system.
The Essence system. And see, Rusty already knows this is going bad. So I've got my hands on it. I will say that I've not played the game yet, so I don't know how it feels when you play it. I've only started reading through the rule book, but it's interesting because it really gets me thinking about licensed properties. In this notion of, does this feel like what a Power Rangers game should feel like as a player, and it's interesting. It's an interesting discussion to bring up now because there's actually a very hot D&D Twitter discussion going on this week about the Dark Souls role-playing game that was just recently announced. Because it's a similar discussion of, does the game you're describing sound like Dark Souls, or does this game that I purchased, does it feel like Power Rangers?
Sure.
And I'll say like and you can, I had a Twitter thread about this last week or so. You can see if you go check my Twitter, but I was really I was shocked because when they announced this Power Rangers role-playing game, they'd said it was going to be set in the setting of the 1993-94 Power Rangers TV show.
The original seasons.
Yeah, the original. Actually, it's like the original 5 seasons. I think it goes through because it goes through. It kind of covers ideas and concepts through in space, which Power Rangers in space. But and it's weird because it's not only is it like here's the setting, here's the city of Angel Grove with all that it entails, but also it's like it has the idea that like certain ideas that like wow this is very an idea that's very fixed to these 2 years of this television show. But that's weird because it doesn't make sense outside of that context. Now, what do I mean by that? Without getting too in the weeds about role-playing games, like just with video games and role-playing games, you build your character, you choose among different options, right? As you have your background of what who you are, what kind of person you are. Are you the brainy kid? Are you the high school football player? Are you the whoever? But one of the main things that you choose, it kind of defines how your character as a Power Ranger behaves, is you pick a color. And that color has with it an identity of like what that color ranger should be like.
Wait, oh, really?
And so if you've only seen the first year or two of Power Rangers, I can describe this and it will make sense. Like to say, yeah, if you're the Blue Ranger, you are the tech kid, you're the smart kid, you're the one who understands technology and stuff. And you're like, oh, just like Billy Cranston. You know, right. Oh, the Red Ranger's the leader. He's strong. He's brave. Just like Jason or... No, just Jason, actually. Just Jason. Not whoever fucking replaced him. Rocco or whatever. The Green Ranger's kind of a loner. It has a special weapon. Like, oh yeah, like the Green Ranger. Like Tommy. He had his dagger
shoulder
flute
pads.
Thing. And his shoulder pads. But then it's like... So that's what you get when you choose the color of your Ranger. And on Twitter I said that's bizarre to me because I actually have not really watched a lot of those first years of Power Rangers. I'm actually very much struggling just because I want to have context. I'm like, wow, this show is bad. I watch a lot of bad shows, but that original Power Rangers, boy, oh boy, does it stink.
How dare you?
Sorry, but it's shocking. One of the Power Ranger shows I like the best was Power Rangers Dino Charge, which came out, it was actually around 2014 or so. It was based on a Japanese series whose name I totally forget, but this Japanese series was almost like an anniversary of the original American Power Rangers. So they did it with dinosaurs, they did it with like the same kind of aesthetics. And then of course when the Americans took it, they kind of kept the same feel. So it's the most feeling like this is like an homage to the original Power Rangers. Well, first of all, there are 10 Rangers of different colors. So like
that's a lot of Rangers.
So if you're like if you're looking at this rule book, you're like, okay, well I'm missing 5 actually, because
where's the Fuchsia Ranger?
But then also this idea that like the colors dictate certain identities or types, what one may call a class in D&D, right? The Blue Ranger in the original Power Rangers was the smart nerdy kid who made like a flying car or whatever, right? In Dino Charge, he's a caveman whose thing is caveman strength. Like he literally jumps and punches people really hard. So you're like, I feel like this doesn't really fit with the whole idea.
Just like a nerd.
Just like a nerd. There's
all right. So choices were made, I'm hearing.
And so it's that weird thing where not only is the setting locked into that 1993 to 1997 era, but so is like the kind of the mechanics or the ideas, which is just really strange. And of course, don't even try to associate it with the Sentai shows. Then the hooks fall out completely. Like, oh no, this doesn't even make sense, right? Which is fine. I wouldn't expect it to match up with the Sentai shows, but like now it's so disconnected from it that you're like, oh,
right, because they would have called it the Zhu Ranger.
Well, yeah,
RPG, not the Mighty Morphin Power Ranger.
Well, Sentai, RPG. Probably the Sentai. But it is a weird thing, and I guess it really just it just makes me think about it. And we see this in other places, right? Like when they do, oh, here's a comic book about this TV show, and like, wow, they missed the point of the TV show. Or here's the movie of your favorite book. Wow, it's like they didn't even read the book.
So especially with like the class-based like personality mechanic, it almost seems. Do you think as a DM, that's like an angle of character creation you could ignore and it would still work fine?
Well, I mean, one could take the roles that they describe of like the nerdy inventor character and the whatever, and you could still keep that because it comes with it abilities and things, right? Oh, if you're the Blue Ranger, you get these special abilities that relate to technology and the Morphin Grid. If you're the Red Ranger, you wear heavier armor, which is bizarre. Like, what hevier armor? Like, they all wear the same
shoulder
tights.
Pads.
Well, no, the shoulder pads was the Green Ranger, except for 3 episodes.
And the White Ranger.
Right. Wait, the Kiba Ranger.
Who else wore the shoulder pads?
The Red Ranger does briefly for a couple episodes.
Oh, nice.
Because in the original Zhu Ranger, they're brothers, and when the Green Ranger dies, he gives the shoulder pads basically to his brother, who occasionally wears them. But of course, in Power Rangers, it's like, oh, Tommy just gives Jason the power, sort of, but then takes it back. I don't know. We don't ask questions.
Power sword? You mean the ocarina?
Yeah, the dagger.
Yeah,
the dragon
dagger. Thunder.
But no, it is just weird. Just that kind of this idea that there would be this license thing, and you're like, wow, it just doesn't. It feels like. I think the one comment I said to a friend of the show, Kai, on Twitter, I said, hey, my takeaway from reading this is maybe it'll be good for G.I. Joe. Like, and I don't know how it's going to, how it will be translated to these other games, like Transformers. Like, I don't, right? Like, and then I start to wonder, like, oh gosh, what like bizarre choices will they make in Transformers?
If you transform into a truck, you are obviously a leader.
Right? And it's like, oh, but what if I just want to be like the lazy good-for-nothing truck? Like, nope, you're a leader because you're a truck.
Well, what's interesting is in the series, oh gosh, I don't remember the years, but the show called, I know it's ironic considering pretty much every other Transformers show has been animated, but there's a show called Transformers Animated where they did something interesting where they kind of, in the lore, they said there's like 4 basic under like body types, for lack of a better word, that there was kind of a caste system on Cybertron. And like, yeah, every robot is an individual, but in that original caste system, you were kind of being you were, depending on what kind of body type you were assigned a certain role and expectations. And aesthetically, you could change and be more unique, but the robots were all based on one of 4 kind of underlying body types. That could be cool, but that is also very specific to that show. So, but there is kind of like a mechanic under there that they could use if they wanted to.
Well, and and I'll be very clear that the roles that they kind of highlight here based on colors, if you take the color out of it, like you could say like, oh, these all seem like roles that make sense,
Right.
Like
right.
if you watch, like I said, Dino Charge, the person who becomes the Purple Ranger is their science and whatnot person. Like, oh, okay, cool, okay, and this person is comparable to what they think the Yellow Ranger is. Okay, cool.
I see.
It's that weird thing that it kind of gets that kind of, like, I'm not sure if this is a good fit. And there's other things that really rub me wrong too. I made a joke about armor. Like the idea that the 5 or the 6 colors of Ranger they provide all have different like armor proficiencies. And you're like,
right.
But they're all wearing the same tights, except for the Green Ranger.
Like body suits with zippers up the back.
Yeah. And it gets to this level of like, I can't imagine a game where you're like, no, I'm the one with armor. Like, really? I mean, now in defense, there are times where characters get like it becomes really popular later that there'll be a power that gives them like powered up armor. In fact, Dino Charge does it, and so does I think Ninja Steel, where they do a more Fedora Fadoopadoops, and suddenly they've got like better armor on. But that's like a power that they all do, as opposed to no, the yellow guy and the pink guy just are like only wear the lightest armor. Because they're women, I guess. And the Red Ranger wears heavy armor, which you never see, So it's stuff like that, or they have all these different weapons they give, which like, oh, here's a power lance, here's a power bow. And part of me is like, these are probably should not be distinguished, right? Like, let's be honest. Those weapons never did anything different depending on, it's just, they were just a prop, right?
What about like Zord creation and stuff like that, or Zord association? How does that work? How do they deal with the Zords?
So I haven't quite gotten through all of it. They do have a section about Zords and kind of building Zords, which, I mean, it gave me the feeling of being like, okay, it's almost like you have a second character, which makes sense, right? Like, no, I have a mammoth. Oh, I have a pterodactyl. Oh, I have a lion, a saber-toothed tiger. But there's just things that kind of are weird to me. I was going to say, one of the other things is they talk about weapons having range. Mm-hmm. And like, no. There's only one range in these shows. You're either in the scene or you're not, right? There's no like it's not like that character has a bow. Yes, they're still using it the same range as the guy with the spear. Right. And that's the stuff that feels like, oh, this feels like something that came from Dungeons and Dragons land. You had this undercarriage of like a tactical combat game, which, as much as people have tried to model Power Rangers as a tactical combat game, and I when I say that I reference there's a video game that's I forget what it's called, but it's very much like a turn-based tactical combat game with this heavy Power Ranger theme. Sure, but like if you watch the show, there's zero tactics. It's you're in the scene punching guys or you're not.
Well, I mean, I guess there's the concept that they're following or the actual show that you're seeing.
Right.
And just especially with nostalgia plays like this, like I'm sure most licensees are going like, we're aiming for what you remember it being like than what it actually was. ignoring faults and budgetary limitations.
Right.
But I know you are a guy that really kind of gets into almost meta play, and like I think you'd be more excited, like, yeah, what if the range of all weapons was the same, right? And like, yeah, that makes sense knowing you.
Yeah, and it's a thing you see in if you look at, and this is a distinction that comes up, like superhero, actually, really, it's superhero role-playing games generally. You see this a lot, of the idea of like, okay, this one gets very like granular and gritty about like ranges and distances and stamina and fatigue, and then these other ones swing way the other direction, where it's a lot more abstracted to, you know, to be more like the comic book rather than the story that's being told by the comic book. So I think that's definitely the distinction I'm having. I'm someone who's looking at this as the TV show, not the story being told by the TV show, which is, you know, why but it's either way. The whole discussion really just gave me that weird thought of, and you know, of how do these licensed products reflect the license or not reflect the license.
Sure.
And I'll tell you, I will probably buy both G.I. Joe and Transformers, so I can have like a set of 3, but also I'm just curious, like, what is Transformers going to do, you know?
Hopefully it's good.
I mean, it's probably, you know, honestly, it'll probably be fun, you know, like, yeah, I'm a truck, turn into a truck, turn into a dude with a big gun.
Can I turn into a 2001 RAV4?
You know?
That's all I care about.
Like, we're Right. I like the fact that when you and I would play this game, we'd spend way too much time about the kind of car that we're turning into. Not because we're car people, but because...
What was the minivan you had in high school?
A 1987 Dodge Caravan. Yeah.
Yes, rolling in with your 87 Caravan. Move like 2001 RAV4. Oh my fucking... Why is the left-hand rearview mirror missing? It fell off on the 101. I don't know.
It's like the low-budget Transformers.
Oh my god, I love it.
So it is always a weird thing, and I think is tabletop role playing games continue to be super popular, because they are, right? Like Dungeons and Dragons has blown up the world, and so is everything else. These discussions will continue to happen in terms of, you know, should a game that's based on a thing, what should it emphasize? What should be part of the gameplay? What shouldn't? You know, I want to mention just a side example of. You know, there's a series of role-playing games by a company called Modifius that include the Star Trek Adventures role-playing game, Dune the role-playing game, Conan the role-playing game, Fallout the role-playing game. And although they all use the same base core mechanics, even there you can see distinctive choices made, because like for Fallout, there's a whole set of rules about, you know, collecting junk and modifying weapons. And then you get something like Dune, where there's not even really combat outside of the abstraction of you have a fight. You know, and it's a question that comes up, you know, and it's important. So yeah, so that is my Week in Geek. I got the Power Rangers role-playing game, and I started reading it, and I kind of had a lot of disappointment in what I was seeing. I'm not saying it's a bad game. It is not capturing the Power Rangers I was hoping for. So that was my Week in Geek. Dan, what about you?
I played a video game.
All right.
On my Nintendo Switch. It might be not what you expect from me. Although, once I mentioned the company, I think I might have talked about this company before, because I like what they do, even though... I'll just come out with it. I played a game called Griftlands, and it came out... when did it come out originally? Oh, it came out last year. I knew it was in early access for a while. It's the most recent game by the company Klei Entertainment, Klei. Well, I'm pretty sure we've talked about on the show in some shape or form. I've really liked their offerings, but more than the games they make, I really like the fact, and I've talked about this, I think, with Thunder Lotus Games as well. This indie companies that are, you don't know what game they're going to make next. Where their output is radically different because they just want to try something new. But there's like an umbrella over every game they make that is clearly Klei Entertainment or Thunder Lotus Games, where there's some sort of clear attention, clear devotion to the kind of games they make, that it's, even though it's very different from maybe other games you played from them, it's clearly a Klei game. Klei is probably most well known, that's a Canadian company, I believe. Probably most popularly known for...
Oxygen Not Included.
Yeah, that's their most popular game. No, Don't Starve, I think is their most popular game. But I think for old people like you and I, we noticed them when they started making this like side scroller beat 'em up called Shank. They made a really good stealth game called Mark of the Ninja. If you haven't played Mark of the Ninja again, you like stealth games, that game is amazing.
And it was re-released in a high definition fancy
remastered version. Yeah, so you can get it on modern consoles as of like PlayStation 4, Xbox One, that kind of stuff, Switch. Now, I don't know if it's on PS5 or Xbox. What do they call it now? I don't remember. But they also made a really interesting like isometric strategy game called Invisible Ink. Griftlands is their newest game, and what the basic way to describe it is that it's a roguelike or even roguelite deck building game. And I've talked about playing deck building games before, mostly on accident. Like you told me, like you're playing like a legit ass deck building game. I'm like, oh, good for me, kind of stuff. Where I'm really out of my wheelhouse here in terms of the video games I normally play. But Griftlands is kind of the science fiction, post-apocalyptic kind of story, where you're, at least at the outset, you're playing a character named Sal Ikderek.
Okay.
And you're a bounty hunter that has just escaped basically indentured servitude. And the story is like, since you've escaped indentured servitude, you want to basically go get revenge on the person that put you into indentured servitude. And that's basically it. But the way the game is structured, there's kind of an overworld map. There's no sprites you control or anything like that. Mm-hmm. It's all dialogue based and encounter based. So you start the game in basically a bar, which is your home base, and you pick up quests. And then when you accept a quest, it goes to an overworld map, and you put your cursor over the map marker that takes you to that quest. And you engage in dialogue that pushes you all over the map. The game mechanics themselves are based around, like I said before, deck building games. But you have two decks mm-hmm. that you're working with: a negotiation deck and a battle deck. And depending on the quest you choose, you're engaging with either one or both decks, not at the same time, but within the same quest. Ostensibly, they work the same way. It's just the nomenclature they give each deck is different. So, negotiation decks are, you're given an option to, like, instead of, you're given two options in a lot of cases. Like, do you want to fight this guy? Or do you want to convince this guy to let you pass by? And you can choose one. Depending on which choice you make, you use whichever, the appropriate deck for that encounter. The negotiation deck is really clever because, and it's probably my favorite part of the game, is because, it's like if you've played deck builder games, it's usually you're getting cards with different like attack moves or defense moves or buff moves. And that's the case here, but like the attacks are like intimidation or flattery, Mm-hmm. And your defense, if you add defense onto your stats, it's called adding composure to your decks. But otherwise the games, the mechanics kind of function the same. Because the battle deck, as you can assume, is works that way. Works a more traditional way, right, where you have like attack moves, stealth, But it's really interesting, and the thing that's interesting is actually today I've been playing it for about a week. I've gotten to the end game with this character Sal, but even if I beat it, I lost my first try fighting the final boss. Halfway through playing this run, I opened up a second character, and when I went to look at that character, one, it says if you decide you want to start a game with this character, it erases whatever game you're playing with the other character. I'm like, oh, okay, it's a one-run thing at a time. But it distinctly tells me like that character's story is completely different. And then there's also a third character you can unlock. But even within each character, it's a run-based game based on the initial setup, where you play until you die, and at which point you start over. But there are some unlocks you have that carry over for each run, like, oh, you start with more health or something like that, or like, oh, if you have these buffs, or if you have these if you unlock this perk, then you'll start with like an XP bonus kind of stuff.
Okay, makes sense.
And and kind of classic roguelike kind of system there. But there's also the option to like, hey, do you just want to play this for the story? In which case we'll lower difficulty and there's no permadeath.
Dan mode.
Right? But that's what I thought. So I actually played a bunch of runs because I'm like, obviously that's not the mode that they built this game around. I'm just going to keep dying. But I'm, and then I got bored, and then went to the story mode. But now at this point, now that I'm kind of at the end game, I'm like, this is kind of boring. It's not boring. It's very fun. But the stress, the anxiety of like, oh, I have to make all the right choices here right away is kind of gone. So I'm actually thinking I'm going to switch it back to the old mode.
You missed the thrill of the fight.
I certainly do. But it's just kind of cool because the few deck builders I've played, whose names I can't remember, it has been all battle focused.
This few games I've played, game 1 and game 2.
Right. You know what? They're literally in the archives. They'll put them in the show notes. It's cool having this other mechanic. And like I said, even though technically the negotiation encounters and the battle encounters function the same, the encounter screens are different. Basically, the way it looks for the negotiation, well, for battle encounters, it's what you expect. It's kind of like a Final Fantasy setup where you have enemies on one side, your characters on the other. Whether you have like companions or pets, even they're on one side, and you're choosing actions that you're going to make to defeat the other. But when you're in the negotiation mode, it's literally like profile pictures of your characters, and there's like a circle drawn around your heads, and what's floating around your heads on the circle are what they call intents, which are upcoming moves you're gonna play, and you can see the upcoming moves that your opponent is gonna play, as well as any sort of like buffs, be it aggression or stuff like that. Aggression, like anxiety, like these buffs that and debuffs that kind of float in your circle, and you can not only attack, like your main health is called the argument, and you can attack the opponent's argument because defeating their main argument will have you win the encounter. But you can also encounter any buffs they have, whether they have increased confidence or increased aggression. You can attack those to get rid of them, which can take any buffs off of their main argument. And as a rhetorician, this is awesome. Right? So I'm like, can I write this off on my taxes? Like, this seems like has a pedagogical purpose I could use. That being said, the story I've seen, like the thing with Clay is that Clay is really art forward. They're really pretty games, really good looking games. The story's fine. It's not as like going. That's the other thing. Going into story mode didn't really unveil like this great epic I was playing. Like, okay, it's a revenge story. I'm making one of those. It's been fun, but it's actually kind of, especially a guy that feels like he doesn't have a lot of history or affinity for card-based games. It's interesting that I'm going back to a more run-based approach that is more about the card game than focusing on the story, because it hasn't been particularly interesting to me. I don't feel like I'm gaining much by going into quote unquote Dan mode, as Andrew said, but specifically the story mode. And it's cool. Like the designs are cool, the characters are cool. Just like with everything Clay has done, I really liked Mark of the Ninja. I really liked the two Shank games, even though they're just completely stupid, but they're intentionally so. And I liked what I played of Invisible Ink. And this game is just, it's, if anything, like it's functional, obviously, and the actual card game is fun, but I just love the fact that it's completely different than anything they've done. If anything, even if I bounced off the game, I'm glad I bought it, just so I'm like, Clay, keep making games, because I want you to keep experimenting. Just like I've talked about, Thunder Lotus Games is the other company that pops into mind when I talk about stuff like this.
Yeah, and I mean, Clay to me is an interesting company, because I like in kind of the slice of games that I've played. I think I played Invisible Ink first.
Good game.
And then I believe I tried to play Don't Starve, although by the time I got to it was Don't Starve Together. And it wanted me to play multiplayer, and I'm like, I'm not here for this. So I've never played it because I couldn't figure out how to play with myself, play by myself. But then I played a lot of Oxygen Not Included, and it's interesting because if nothing else, this is a company that demonstrates, like I want to contrast it with what's the company that made Hades and Transistor,
and
Supergiant Games,
Supergiant Games, and
right,
Bastion.
where like. The whole joke with Supergiant is like they're making permutations on the same theme, right? Which is not, they're doing well at it.
They're doing great. Those great games.
Where Clay is they're it's like they're just all over the place.
Yeah,
they're making lots of different kinds of games, with really different different audiences, I think. I mean, I enjoy Oxygen Not Included, but not everyone likes Heat Transfer Fluid Flow, the game.
Oh, talk dirty to me, Andrew. Yeah, and similarly, like I was saying earlier with Thunder Lotus Games, they've made 3 games so far. Another Canadian company, actually. Jotun, which is kind of like an isometric Zelda-like, but it's also kind of like a run-based game. They made Sundered, which is a Metroidvania. And the most recent game, Spiritfarer, is a management sim about being the ferryman of death. I
didn't realize that was the same company.
Yeah. And I've ever since Jotun, like this company's like they made beautiful games, and then then they released Sundered, which is like really dark and, like I said, a Metroidvania. I'm like, oh, this company's interesting, which made me super excited for Spiritfarer, and I love that game. And I'm going to play through it again because they just released their final piece of DLC, and I haven't played any DLC of that game yet, so I just want to go through the whole experience again. But we're not talking about Thunder Lotus because Clay is doing something very similar. I mean, again, I'm still kind of I feel like I'm in the early throes of playing Griftlands, but it's so interesting what they're doing with the game. And I find the actual gameplay fun, even if the story's not connecting with me as much. I'm excited to play through with that second character I've unlocked and see what kind of story that's being offered. And the other thing is that while you're going between quests on the overworld map, there are random encounters that pop up. And by random encounters, I don't mean Final Fantasy random encounters, which just means fighting bad guys. You might just get like an encounter that pops up that goes like, hey, you ran across a stray dog. And I put dog in quotes because it's a fantasy game. Mm-hmm. Like, what do you want to do? You want to pet it? Do you want to fight it? And there are benefits to doing either. But whatever you choose, it can affect how your game goes forward. So there's lots of like little incidents that pop up throughout the game that also are kind of like, well, you can make a good choice or a bad choice. Oh, I should say this, in the battle phase of the game, which is also adds a layer of interesting storytelling opportunities, is that you can, in the battle phase of the game, not the negotiation phase where you're actually attacking people, when they get to a certain amount of hit points or health, the enemies just straight up surrender. And we can either accept their surrender or finish the job. In every situation I've come across, even when they seem like just like unimportant encounters, since there are like factions and mm-hmm. these factions relate to the story, like if you decide to execute, for lack of a better word, a member of the Alliance, an encounter later in the game has more enemies filled into it because you killed that Alliance guy earlier in the game when you should have maybe just let him live. But who knows, right? Like it's everything seems connected, even though it's clearly it's procedural and it's different every time you play. So it's a really neat game. Even if it's not the best game ever, I would recommend checking out Griftlands if you want to just kind of see all these systems interact with each other. And being Clay, the art's really nice at the very least.
If nothing else, they've made a kind of maybe a different entry into the field, right? Not, it's not just another roguelike. It's not just another card game.
And to your interests, it's not a multiplayer game. So you're in the
good.
clear.
Yeah. I mean, I don't like playing with other people.
Clearly. That's why you've been making a podcast for 8 years.
Yeah, by myself, right?
Yep. I'm just a figment of your imagination.
I knew it!
So, if you, dear listeners, have any thoughts about the topics we discussed this week, feel free to leave your thoughts as comments on the page for this episode at forallintents.net.
You can also post your comments or engage in conversations with other listeners on our Facebook page.
You can also find us on other social media, such as Twitter, where you can find us at our respective handles. You can find Andrew at Profound Dark. You can find me at dbethel. You can also find us on Instagram, where you can find Andrew at Profound Brick, and me and my work at dbethel Comics.
While you're at our website at forallintents.net, you can also take a look at our YouTube page, which you can get to by clicking on the link in the corner that says YouTube.
We use 2 tracks of music for our show. One is called Disco Medusae. The other is called District 4. They're both written and performed by Kevin McLeod of the Clan McLeod, immortal swordsman, graph paper enthusiast, and musician extraordinaire.
You can find his music at incompetech.filmmusic.io, and that is all licensed under the Creative Commons 4.0 by attribution license.
If you'd like the show and like to help us out, the best way to do so would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you happen to use, whether it's something like the Apple Podcasts app or something like Spotify. Although, personally, I wouldn't recommend Spotify. They pay money for douchebags. But what would help us out even more would be to go to their storefront and leaving some sort of review. Whether a text review or using the proprietary metric will help spread the word to new potential listeners through the magic of algorithms. Do we have time for a Star Trek minute? I don't know. I don't really have anything new to say except for Next Generation is still rad.
Actually, this is an interesting. So this week is the last episode of the mid-season of the. So okay, this is a weird thing. Normally they've been releasing these shows in pretty solid chunks.
Yeah.
Like all of Picard came out.
That's how I release episodes.
But Star Trek Prodigy is reaching their mid-season finale.
Okay, that's the animated show.
The animated show on Nickelodeon.
That's like the more all ages kind of family show.
Yeah.
Adventure show.
So they've been doing some pretty wild heavy lifting in the last couple episodes.
All right.
People are really enthused with the show.
Are you enthused with the show?
Yeah. No.
Okay.
At first it was kind of like, what is this show? This is for kids. This is for kids. And now it's like, all right,
yeah,
it's for kids, but it's. What I'll say is it's an interesting way of and it's not for everyone. I get that. I'm a big Star Trek nerd, but I like that it's telling this Star Trek story from an outsider's perspective. That's what's interesting. But anyway, that finishes up this week, and next week, Discovery Season 4 returns for its last some number of episodes, and then in the first week of March we have Picard Season 2 starts, and then when that
probably the most divisive of the Star Trek shows, it seems.
I mean, they're all divisive. I don't know. I don't know if it's nearly as divisive as, like, say, Star Wars shows.
Well, yeah.
Woo! But and then sometime in May we get Strange New Worlds. Which is the newest show.
That's the original Enterprise captain show.
Yes, Captain Christopher Pike. So
there we go.
It just you're having a great time with the fourth season, and as I keep saying, I'm in the this wild time to watch Star Trek. There's Star Trek around every corner. It's great.
I limit the fact that at some point I'm going to need to sign up for Paramount Plus, and the question is, which other service do I cancel? I can't subscribe to everything, Andrew. It's just irresponsible.
No, I get it. And as someone who subscribes to most things, it is ridiculous. But I also don't subscribe to cable, so. Right. One thing I will say, my final comment here. Paramount Plus, and this sucks. On some of their shows, they because of the licensing, they pull the show once the next season starts.
Oof, really? And they own all these shows. That is dumb as hell.
Not every show. So the only ones I've seen it for are Magnum PI, the new show. Because I thought, I'd watch it, but by the time I got Paramount Plus, they were in season 2, and season 1 just wasn't on there. And since then, season 2 has disappeared. And so that's got to be a licensing one. And sure. I believe also, I want to say The Equalizer as well. Now maybe because both those shows, both of those shows are potential. They probably, if you pull the thread, they go back to other networks.
Sure.
But that sucks. That sucks to be watching a show.
It could even be music licensing, honestly.
Ugh, don't even get me started about that.
Well, until you make responsible fiscal decisions, dear listeners, I'm D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And for all intents and purposes,
that was a podcast.
And guess what? That's how it's done. Motherfucking professionals up in here. We've been doing this for how long? 8 years almost? Yeah. We're finally learning how to do this. We can't go back and we can't capture that magic. No. The inimitable crossover between Star Trek and Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cats. You apparently have thoughts about Thaco.
I do.
No Thaco, no way. That's what I say.
Yeah, don't say that.